While waiting for the foundation to set, I was thinking about the design of the enclosure and decided to make some changes. This is the original enclosure, solid concrete walls all the way around, about 1.5 inches thick. Foundation's not shown here, but you can see it was hollow inside. I was intending on leaving the concrete form, the plywood forms that go in the middle there, forever in perpetuity, encased in the concrete. But then I thought about it, and that wood's eventually going to break down, settle at the bottom, and stop these drains from working. So I decided to make a change. Let's get this recentered. So what I'm going to do is add this opening through the middle. This will allow me to extract the inner form. But again, this is still going to be fully cast in place, and had to come up with a way to do that. So let's take a look at the new form. Here is my new form with the openings cut in, both the inner form, which I have contrasted in a darker color, and the outer form, which this whole thing's going to be made out of 1/2 inch MDF. So this is what it's going to look like. As you can see, we've got this piece right here, and turning on the other one, contrasted in red. This is actually going to be made out of 1/8 inch hardboard, formed around, and what I will do is, once I put this in place, I will just staple it in place all the way around the form. So that should give me my fully casted form. Keep in mind, I've never done something like this before, so it is an experiment in progress. But now it's time to get going on the manufacture of this form. Here are the prints. This is the top form that goes inside. These are the parts that will be this form right here. We're going to get all those cut out, and these are the inner form walls, the shelf that goes on top, a spacer, and the shelf spacers. And here is my cut sheet with all the parts roughly laid out. So my next step, I've already have a 1/2 inch MDF sitting on the cutting board. My next step is to start trimming that down into manageable sizes to get all these parts cut, set up, and ready to pour the form. Time to start making sawdust. Gonna cut out those forms. I have my first sheet of MDF on the table. I've got my prints and all my tools ready to go. Here are the prints for all the parts I need to make. And this is my cut sheet. Showing here are 2 MDF panels. Most of the parts out of this panel, this is the one I'm working on now, and I have a plan to go forward. First, we're going to cross-cut this part out. Then we're going to rip these down. Cross-cut this one, and then rip it, and then get the small parts out of the center sections, and then route out the cutouts. So that's my plan. Let's see how well this works out. Especially when cutting MDF. The adhesive used in the MDF, they could be a little bit toxic, a little worse than just actually bleeding wood. So we're going to have my exhaust fan running, and we'll have to narrate the rest of this. Okay, showing a close cut of my plywood crosscut sled. You can see how the saw sits on there, and the edge of the bottom panel is the outside edge of the saw blade. So we just set that up, clamp it down, and run it across. Unfortunately, I don't have one to go the long way, so we'll have to improvise for that. So let's get back to the setup. At this point, I believe the board is small enough to move over to a table saw. Okay, next cuts. We're going to get these out of here. Then with the remnant that's left, we're going to cross cut here and then rip those out and get this one. Got to be careful with this one because this piece is bigger than that piece. So we go to our print, and that is the back wall, 11 3/4. I already looked at the other print for this one. That's 11 1/2. So we'll rip the 11 3/4, and then after we cross cut it, we'll have to rip it the other one again for 11 1/2. But let's get these other pieces out of the remnant. Now I'm going to be needing some kind of a template to cut these out. There's 4 panels. I would like them all to be the same size, and I think I came up with a way to do that. Now let's see if I can make it. This is going to be my template. 7 11 32 radius, 8 11/16 center to center on the 2 outer ends, 14 11/16 size. So now let's see if what I think will work will work. Video camera died before I was done with the circle jig, but all that you missed was the separation of the 2 halves. I did a preliminary cut most of the way down, so I just had to finish with a couple inches. Took it over and sanded the edge to get them reasonably flat. And next, we're going to cut out the center section of this to glue these together to make my template. This is way too big to attempt to run on my little Rikon bandsaw, but I think this is going to work out okay. Now let's get that center section cut out. The length is 8 11/16, but that is not critical. What is critical is the length needs to match these. So here's what we're going to do. Back over to the crosscut sled. This is my blank that's going to end up being cut. But I want to set the size to the same as these. So this is going to be real simple. We're going to put this in here. We're going to clamp a block on this side. I need it. Okay, we got 23 and 13/32, which is very close to 3/8. And I have 23 and 3/8. So this should work out perfect. I'm going to cut a couple of biscuits in here, glue it up, and when it's all set and ready to go, we'll be back. Template is glued up and ready to go, and now it's time to get it located on the board so I can cut out that center hole. Coming in close, you can see right here I've got a dowel centered on the center of the radius, and I have marked up and drilled a hole right there in this board where I want that dowel to sit, and that's going to locate one half of that template. And then we're going to drive a screw in the other end, and that should be ready to set up for the router. So let's get going. Before we get started with setting up the jig, first I'm going to get the router set up. So here we got my plunge router, got a bushing set in here, and I need to set the height of the blade. I only want to go through the 1/2 inch. So we can do a bunch of measurements and set the height with a height gauge, but we're going to do something quick and simple. This is the same as the template, as you can see. It's the same thickness of the template, so that's going to be sitting right there. This is going to be the bottom, so we're going to set that right there. So first step, we're going to push this down, so now this bit is set to be at the bottom, scraping the surface of the board. At this point, we go down here, set our stop. So our stop is set right there, and then rotate this. Each one of these steps is an 1/8 inch. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So now this should be set. Let me go find a scrap piece of the board that I'm going to cut through. Here we go. Now when I plunge it, you can see we are right at the bottom of the board. Quick and simple setup for your boards. You don't have to measure anything, you just get the scrap stock in place, and you're set up and ready to go. And also notice I do all this setup with it unplugged. So now our router's set, we'll put that aside, and we're going to work on getting the jig set up in place. Okay, we believe we're ready to set up and align this jig. Again, I got a 1/4 inch dowel pin sticking out the bottom of my jig, lining up with the hole. Should be right about there. There we go. That's in. Make sure the dowel is pressed down below the surface. Now we have to keep it from rotating. We've got a center line across the jig. I've got a center line on the board. So we're just going to line those up. Doesn't have to be exact. Remember, this is just a concrete form. Start me a hole. I don't want to drill through this board. We'll just move it over. Going to want it countersunk. The screw has to be below the surface. And now my template's not going anywhere. You may have noticed a couple of boards I have clamped on top here. When I finish routing this thing out, this whole piece is going to want to drop down, and we don't want it to do that. So this is real simple. These boards go underneath and just clamped in place, which will prevent this board from dropping down and possibly upsetting the router. Now everything's in place and we should be ready to get this routed. So let's get going. Saucepan. Successful cut. Not quite deep enough right here. That just shows that I had the depth just perfect. Let's get a closer look. We come down here and get a look on my boards underneath. See, it's just barely scarred, which means I had the depth just perfect going through. So there's my first board cut out. Now it's time to get set up for the next board, and you would think I would use the same jig, but this was a one-time jig. All the time I took to put this together, I used one time. What's more important for these boards, all four of them, this is the outer board, I've got two inners, is that cutout is at the same place. So even if this one was cut wrong, I want this one to be exactly the same. So this is now going to be our template. And it's just a matter of getting everything lined up. Clamped in place. Double check, make sure all my edges are flush and we're set up. But this time, we're using a template router bit. Let's see if I can zoom in without moving the camera and get a look at that. For those of you not familiar with it, this type of bit is a template bit There's a roller bearing sitting right at the base that is flush with the cutters. So this bearing will go up against your template around the corners, and it will cut flush and duplicate whatever the template is. They have two types of these. They have these with bearings at the bottom and bearings at the top, depending on how your template is set up. And once again, while I'm playing around with that bit, you can see it's unplugged. I like my fingers. Unfortunately, this is the smallest one I have. It's a 3/4 diameter, so I'm going to be making huge amounts of sawdust on this one and wasting a lot of material. I just put on my shopping list to get a 1/2-inch bit. The exhaust fan. Be sure to subscribe to follow this project and hit that notification bell to be informed of future updates.